more serious matters with Sir Liam Fox, former Conservative Defence Secretary, joins us on the line. Very good morning to you, Liam.
Morning, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. Well, just on that exchange we've just been playing, what did you make of I mean, it was just an analogy that Trump was using that Mark Rutte picked up on, but Donald Trump is clearly enjoying it. But actually, there's quite a lot of truth in that sort of daddy analogy, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's a playful aside, and I think it's pretty pathetic that that's become the main story from what was one of the most important NATO summits. And I think I'm afraid it shows a total trivialization in parts of the media that it was a funny aside. Yeah. This is not the main story.
No, of course it's not the main story. We have been discussing for quite some time on this show the main story, which is our need to be able to defend ourselves and our allies, and I would say also the likes of Israel and Ukraine. And they're certainly being played as a win by Donald Trump that he'd got this commitment from not all but most countries, and he was making it very clear. I mean, Spain, I don't think are going to get. They ain't going to get some very good trade deals coming very soon when it comes to their refusal to go up to 5% of GDP on defence. But it's not really what it sounds like on, in the headlines, because it's 3.5% on defence, and it's, by by later this decade, and the 5% is by 2035. And it's actually a lot of it is border security and things like that, which come normally out of Home Office budgets and the like. Are we doing enough to defend our nation states, our allies, from the clear and obvious danger posed by countries like Russia, Iran, and China?
Well, you make a very good point there, Julia. And of course, NATO is both a military and a political alliance. And what we saw very much yesterday was the political side of that, showing unity of purpose in committing to those figures. You're completely correct that within those figures, there's a fair amount of smoke and mirrors. It's not just about defense spending, as we normally talk about, but defense and security spending. And even within the defense spending itself, it's extending the definition somewhat to bring in areas that we wouldn't traditionally regard as being part of pure defense. There are some positives to take from it. I think that European NATO is finally, belatedly, recognizing that it must carry more of the load of collective defense in NATO. I think that's driven by countries like Poland, for example, the new German government, very much, and of course with Finland and Sweden being there. So there's a realization that this is an urgent problem that needs to be addressed. I think for the United Kingdom, of course, we start way ahead of most in being the sixth biggest military in the world. But I think, as you and I have discussed on this program before, it's not just what we spend, it's what we spend it on. Yeah. And each of those NATO countries could spend more money. They could spend it on more manpower without giving any greater collective capability to NATO. And what is necessary from the European part of NATO is that they sit down and work out what they need to do, each of them, given that no country in Europe has a big enough economy to provide full spectrum defense. What roles will they play as a genuine alliance? What capabilities will they bring to that?
And we bring the nuclear umbrella, which is a big part of our defence spending, but we don't have a very large, army, for instance. So different countries provide different resources.
Well, so for the United Kingdom, we are a maritime nation. 94% of our trade goes by sea routes. We therefore require the ability to maintain the security of the global maritime network. We have a nuclear deterrent. So it's quite right, I think, that if we're bringing not only that, but we're bringing carrier strike capability with our new carriers, which no other country in European NATO actually has, which is able to be interoperable with the US Marine Corps, we're bringing something different there. Yeah. It is unreasonable to expect the United Kingdom to provide the nuclear deterrent, carrier strike, the cyber capabilities that we have, and our expeditionary forces, to also have an army that is capable of being the land defences for Europe. That is what Germany and France and Poland and other countries will need to bring to the alliance. The British taxpayers cannot be expected to carry the greater burden of that. So I think that is the conversation we have to have. Mark Rutte's real task is going to be getting those European countries to be coordinated in what they actually bring to collective defence. Yeah. just about the numbers, how you spend the
No,
numbers.
exactly. And Philip Ingram was just making a point a little bit earlier about, in terms of what the Russian economy, okay, in a hot war in Ukraine at the current time, through their choice, but it's basically a military economy at the moment, but what they're spending, with a much smaller economy, I think smaller economy than Italy's, that they are able to be churning out a huge amount of military hardware, way more than much bigger economies are doing. We don't spend the money, we spend very well.
Well, this is the Russian problem at the moment. 45% of the GDP is being diverted into the military or the war in Ukraine. That leaves the wealth-creating bit of their economy much smaller. Yeah. And it's much easier to translate a peace economy into a war economy than vice versa. The Russian base rate's 21%, their inflation rate's 11%. That would be intolerable in a democracy. The banking system is effectively bankrupt, and their fiscal rules are all bent. They can't maintain this for any period of time. And one of the conversations we should be having in the West is, how do we use our economic strength to outlast Russia?
Yeah, well, for a start, we need to make sure those sanctions are working properly. So instead of saying, "Oh, we won't export anything or buy anything from Russia," not allowing third-party countries, the stands, India and the others, to just basically to use their, buy our stuff or buy their stuff and sell it and become the middleman. We could stop that.
We also have unintended consequences of our sanctions. For example, what we should be trying to encourage is capital flight out of Russia. And yet the sanction structure makes it very difficult for any of the oligarchs to put their money,
get their money out
into Europe. Yeah. And, we need to rethink that. We need to be having a combination of an economic strategy in dealing with Russia's war machine, as well as the political and military.
Did you detect, lots of focus has been on Iran and Israel lately, but of course the war, and Gaza sort of went off the agenda for a bit. Ukraine has been off the agenda. I know Zelensky was at the NATO meeting, desperate to become a member of NATO. That not looking likely on the cards at all. Did you detect a softening, though, in Donald Trump's stance on Ukraine? There was certainly a sympathetic exchange with a reporter. I don't know whether you could read anything into that, who's from Ukraine, and her husband is fighting on the front line there. But did you detect at all that there's more likelihood that Donald Trump is coming round to the idea that, that Ukraine needs the same sort of help that Israel needs?
Well, there's a pattern of behavior. George W. said that he looked into Putin's eyes and saw his soul, but he was soon, enlightened to the reality of Putin. I remember David Cameron doing the same. Emmanuel Macron did the same. President Obama did the same. All decent people eventually come to the conclusion that you cannot do business with Vladimir Putin. Once KGB, always KGB. And I think Donald Trump's coming to that same conclusion, that however much you want to do business and however much it might be beneficial to do business with Putin, you cannot do it. He cannot be accommodated. And I think that Donald Trump, has handled the Iranian situation very well. I think he made it, people wondered what were his policies. His policies were Israel has a right to exist. Iran will not get a nuclear bomb. The Abraham Accords are the best way forward diplomatically for the region. And people wondered whether he meant it. Well, now they know that he did.
They know he did. And it's interesting, actually, after all that fuss and to-do about an internal government report suggesting that Iran's nuclear capability only been put back by a matter of months rather than obliterated, as Donald Trump claimed. I don't think you're ever going to obliterate any nuclear capability. But now a CIA report sort of backing up Donald Trump, saying there has been a serious impact on Iran's nuclear capability, which surely the whole world should welcome.
And Israel coming up with a similar conclusion. I think that what they'll determine is that the Iranian nuclear program has probably been put back years, that it would cost a huge amount of money that Iran doesn't have to reconstitute it, and that there are signs of changes in attitude in the Iranian hierarchy. Against that, we know that they probably moved their stocks of uranium somewhere else. They could restart the program. Maybe, just maybe, there's a chink of light here in terms of getting a change in attitude, if not immediately from the current Iranian leadership, from some kind of not revolution, but evolution of what is happening there. And I think that Donald Trump he read the signals well in terms of Iran's response to his attack on the nuclear facilities. And I think that he has actually been a force for tremendous good here in holding back, particularly what would have been, I think, a disastrous Israeli response that would have been disproportionate. So I think the president goes back to Washington very much strengthened internationally and probably domestically too.
Yeah, indeed. It's been very interesting. Can I just ask you about a completely different story? We've been talking about this all this morning. As a former GP yourself by training, before you went into politics, big ongoing debate about welfare reform. Prime Minister reported to be watering down his welfare reform. It's coming for a vote next Tuesday with up to 130 Labour MPs, backbenchers saying, we're just not going to vote for it. We're going to basically make it not happen. He's under an awful lot of pressure. Leaving aside the politics of that, as a former GP, someone who'd have patients coming in unable to work or incapacitated or needing help for independent life, needing things like PIP, Personal Independence Payments, do you think those reforms go too far? Should they be watered down or should they be strengthened?
No, I think the government, in fact, is on the right course here in terms of bringing down our welfare bill. The idea that people in Britain are much more unhealthy and more of them are disabled than ever before, given that the sort of society we live in, is untenable. I think that we cannot afford a welfare bill because the welfare bill of this size actually crowds out funding we need in other places, including healthcare itself, including in education and including in defence. And I think that an addiction to welfare has probably done more to harm Western states than any actions from any of our enemies. I think an addiction to welfarism is an enfeebling process that actually makes people too dependent on the state and diminishes personal responsibility. And if the only value you know you've got is what the state gives you for doing nothing, how can you know what value you could be to yourself, your family, and your community? There's a big moral debate to be had here on welfare, as well as the numbers. The government is quite right, and they're suffering, of course, from the fact that they've got such a big majority with lots of people who never expected to be in Parliament, and I'm perfectly sure Keir Starmer never expected to have in Parliament either.
No, indeed. Absolutely fascinating to talk to you. Sir Liam Fox, former Conservative Defence Secretary, former GP, asking him about that. Thank you very much. Brief word from Philip Ingram.
I just want to correct Sir Liam on a couple of things. The French have got a carrier strike capability. It's not fifth generation. It doesn't integrate with the Americans as well.
He did make that proviso that can interact with the Americans.
Exactly, but it's currently deployed in Mission Clemenceau 25 in the Pacific, and the Italians have got a very limited capability.
OK. All right then. All right, Mr. Pedant in the corner there.